I averaged 4,295 steps a day for 13 months. I never set foot in a gym and I lost 4.5 stone. That's not the interesting part. The interesting part is what's happening to my muscle the entire time. I'm Neil, 13 years off NHS blood tests, off all medication since February 2024. And the thing I'm about to show you is that muscle loss in midlife is the one metabolic change that doesn't show up on a scale, doesn't show up in a blood test, and happens quietly while everything else is improving. The sequencing of how I did this turned out to matter. Today I'm going to walk you through all of it with the data. What 4,295 steps a day actually did to my body over 13 months, fat loss, the biomarker changes, and the one marker that only moved when I added resistance. Then what the blood test showed when I finally started lifting, a number that actually made my GP ask if I'd gone back on statins. Then what this tells us about the sequence and why the order matters more than the effort. Muscle strength declines 2 to 3 times faster than muscle mass with age. It's not a rough estimate, that's what the data says. Peter Attia, citing research from Andy Galpin at Cal State Fulton, put it simply: by the time you notice you've lost mass, the underlying strength has already been declining for years. The fast twitch type 2 muscle fibres, the ones responsible for power, for the ability to catch yourself when you stumble, for explosive movements, they go first, and they go quietly. Most people don't notice because muscle mass changes slowly. You don't step on the scale and read less muscle. It doesn't show up in your cholesterol results or your HbA1c. You feel a bit weaker. You notice stairs are harder. You assume it's just getting older. But here's what I didn't understand. When I was walking those 4,295 steps a day, it isn't just getting older. Think of muscle mass like money in the bank, and this becomes more true with every decade you age. At 45, it's a nice savings account. Useful, worth protecting, but not urgent. At 65, it's your pension. The people who can still get off the floor unassisted at 80, carry shopping without stopping halfway up the path, crouch down to a grandchild without needing a wall to hold themselves back up. They started making deposits at 50. Sarcopenia, the medical term for age-related muscle loss, starts in your 30s and it accelerates if you don't actively work against it. It's a diagnosable condition, not an inevitable fact of aging. And what the research shows consistently is that resistance training is the primary intervention, not the only tool, the primary one. Stuart Phillips and Neil McCartney put the numbers on it. Muscle loss begins around 40 and progresses at roughly 1 to 2% per year. By the 8th decade, your 70s, your 80s, up to 40% of peak muscle mass may be gone. Jack Mosley, GP registrar, majors in diabetes, says it plainly. Muscle peaks between 30 and 35, declines gradually through your 40s, accelerates after 50, and after 60 you could lose more than 10% per decade. You're not just losing how you look, you're losing metabolic capacity. And here's why that matters so much, and why it isn't just about strength. Cyrus Kambata, exercise physiologist, spent years working with people with type 2 diabetes, describes muscle tissue as one of the body's primary sites for glucose disposal. More muscle mass means greater capacity to absorb glucose from the blood. Resistance training in his work is the most effective exercise modality for improving insulin sensitivity. Not because of calories burned, but because of what muscle does metabolically at rest around the clock. Muscle is a metabolic endocrine organ. It pulls glucose from the bloodstream, secretes hormones that communicate with the brain, fat and bone. Its structural role, the ability to lift things and move, is almost the least of what it does. Tim Spector makes this point in a way I find useful. Exercise is largely ineffective for weight loss. Only about 10% of total energy expenditure can be manipulated through physical activity. The preset resting metabolic rate, which is largely determined by lean muscle mass, accounts for 70%, which means the reason 4,295 steps a day worked for fat loss wasn't primarily the calories I was burning, walking, it was what fasting and non-UPF eating had done to the metabolic environment. The walking kept me moving, kept insulin sensitivity improving, reduced inflammatory load. But the fat loss was driven by the food and fasting decisions. And that distinction matters because it means I was potentially losing fat, fixing biomarkers, and quietly losing muscle the whole time without knowing it. The mechanism doesn't wait for a GP to notice it. It operates in the background for years before it causes functional problems. Understanding it at 42 or 52 gives you more options than understanding it at 62. An orthopaedic surgeon put 3 CT scans side by side, a 40-year-old triathlete, a sedentary 70-year-old man, and an active 74-year-old. The triathlete's muscle was dense and clean. The The sedentary 70-year-olds looked like a Sunday joint, all that marbling you'd have to trim before you'd want to eat it. The active 74-year-old, clean as a lean steak. 4 years older than the sedentary person, structurally younger in every meaningful sense. The marbling isn't just aesthetic, it's intramuscular fat. Fat that has infiltrated the muscle tissue itself, and it impairs strength, slows metabolism, and drives insulin resistance in a way that dietary change alone cannot fully address. You can fast, eat well, fix your blood sugar, and still have intramuscular fat accumulating inside the muscle tissue if you're not providing a resistant stimulus. The active 74-year-old's clean CT scans wasn't down to genetics, it was down to staying active through the years when most people stop. You don't have to be a triathlete, you just have to keep moving and eventually add the right kind of movement. A lot of people believe that if they lose weight without lifting, they must have lost muscle. The assumption fat loss equals muscle loss, so you need to compensate by eating more protein or exercising harder. The reality is more nuanced. Whether muscle is preserved during fat loss depends primarily on the metabolic environment. Insulin sensitivity, protein adequacy, the presence or absence of a resistant stimulus, not purely on exercise volume. My walking first phase wasn't laziness, it was addressing the metabolic environment first, fixing insulin sensitivity, reducing inflammation, getting the system working. That's what the data eventually told me. The walking wasn't doing nothing, it was building the foundation on which resistance training would later multiply. The sequencing wasn't accidental, it turned out to be correct. December 2023, NHS blood test, total cholesterol 8. HDL, the so-called good cholesterol, 1.3. I'd been on statins for 11 years at that point. Here's what I found when I went back through the records. HDL in 2012 was 1.6. By 2016, it was 1.5. By 2020, 1.33. By December 2023, 1.3. 11 years on statins and the good cholesterol had been quietly dropping the whole time. That was news I hadn't been given. The cholesterol HDL ratio, which is more predictive of cardiovascular risk than total cholesterol alone, was sitting at 6.15. Target's under 5. I was nowhere near it. February 2024, stopped statins, started eating properly, fasting, non-UPF, system I'd been building since Boxing Day 23. I started walking 4,295 steps a day on average, sometimes less on fasting days, when my body naturally conserved energy and dropped to around 2,971. No structured exercise, no gym, just the walking. 13 months later, April 2025, blood test results. My GP opened the file, there was a pause. You back on statins? Shook my head. No, he knew that. I'd been off them since February 2024. He scrolled through the numbers, total cholesterol down, LDL down, HbA1c at 37. I was out of pre-diabetic range for the first time in years. CRP down 84% and HDL 1.5 up from 1.3. A 15% improvement, more importantly, the cholesterol HDL ratio 4.7, within target range for the first time in over a decade. This is better than when you were on medication, he said. What are you doing? Now here's the important bit about timing, because this is where the sequence matters. I'd added structured lifting, weighted squats, lunges, upper body work. Around 2 months of the journey, building gradually. By the April 2025 blood test, I'd been walking for 14 months and I was 90 days into resistance training. HDL responds to physical stimulus. It responds to the metabolic stress of lifting, the hormonal signals that resistance training creates. Pills don't build HDL, pills lower total cholesterol. Movement, specifically resistance movement, appears to build the good stuff. I can't tell you with certainty that the resistance training caused the HDL improvement because I was also fasting, eating differently, off statins. Multiple things changed over the period. Honest answer, I don't know exactly which input moved which needle. What I can say is that the HDL had been falling for 11 years despite statins, and it started rising 14 months after I stopped them and 90 days after I started lifting. The other data point I want to be honest about, because it complicates the clean narrative, my first 90 days, 2.4 stone lost. Felt incredible. Then around the 6-month mark, the scale went up slightly. 2 pounds regained. Panicked initially, then measured. Waist down, energy better, body recomposition, fat loss and muscle gain happening simultaneously. The scale went up because muscle was displacing fat. Muscle is denser. The scale lied, but the tape measure told the truth. And by November 2025, I was 13 stone 3, Slightly over the number I'd hit after a brutal 21-day fast in the summer, but the measurements were 7 inches smaller in total. Same weight, completely different body. The intramuscular fat scan, the one the orthopaedic surgeon described, that's what I think was changing. Not the number on the scale, the quality of the tissue underneath. The thing I couldn't see during this walking only phase is I was walking 4,295 steps a day, losing fat, improving every biomarker that my GP could measure, but muscle, the metabolic organ, the pension account, was likely being quietly drawn down the whole time. Not catastrophically, not in a way that showed up, but the withdrawals were happening. When I added resistance training, the deposit started, and 3 months later, a number moved that hadn't moved in over a decade. My GP asked if I was back on medication. I wasn't, I'd just started paying the pension contribution. I'm 53, I was on 6 medications, and now I'm on none. I didn't read about this and decide to make videos. I did it, tracked it, got the blood test to prove it, and then made the videos. If you'd rather focus on one who's got the receipts than someone with opinions, subscribe. New videos Monday, Wednesday and Friday. If I was starting this from scratch, knowing what the data now shows, the one thing I'd have done earlier is add resistance training sooner. Not immediately. I still think the walking first phase was correct, fixing the metabolic environment before loading the system. If I tried lifting in January 24 when I was still inflamed, still pre-diabetic, still on statins, I think the risk of injury and burnout would have been significant. But somewhere around month 3 or 4, not month 13, I'd have started. Body weight first, squats, lunges, press-ups. Enough stimulus to tell the muscle we're not closing the factory. Then gradually loaded, once the pattern was consistent. What resistance training looks like for me now, for reference, weighted squats, weighted lunges, dumbbell work. 3 movements, 3 sets of 8 to 15 reps, working closely to failure 3 times a week. When set 1 hits 15 reps, comfortably, the weight goes up. That's it. No gym membership required. A rucksack and body weight got me started. Here's how I frame resistance training now. It's your independence insurance policy. You're not paying premiums for a beach body or to compete with the lads at the gym. You're paying so that at 75 you can get off the floor in your living room without yelling for help, carry 2 bags from the car without stopping halfway up the path, gasping, crouch down to tie your grandkids' shoelaces at the park without needing a wall to hold yourself back up. That's the policy payout, not 6-pack abs, not a deadlift personal best. Function, independence, dignity. Pay the premiums, 2 or 3 30-minute sessions a week. At 75, the policy pays out. Same age as your mate who didn't, different outcomes. Start with walking if you haven't. I was 4,295 steps. We're talking 30 minutes a day. Fix the foods, get the metabolic environment moving. That order still stands, but don't wait 13 months to add resistance. Around month 3, 4, add 3 bodyweight sessions a week. Squats, press-ups, lunges, 20 minutes. That's it. That's enough to keep the factory open. From month 3 to 6, maintain, don't escalate. Consistency will beat intensity every time. From month 6, if the bodyweight sessions feels easy, add some load, rucksack with some books, dumbbells, a gym if you want one, but it's not required. Track what matters. Waist circumference weekly. Strengthen and change movements monthly, not just scale weight. The scale lies when body recomposition is happening. The tape measure doesn't. 4 to 8 weeks, nervous system adaptation. You'll get stronger without visible muscle change. That's normal. It's the signal before the structure. 6 to 12, first noticeable changes in how your body feels under load. Lifts feel different. Energy under exertion improves. Month 3, first sensible time for a blood test comparison. If you started fasting and food changes simultaneously, don't expect dramatic biomarker shifts from resistance training alone. In this window, you need more time, 12 to 14 months. That's when I saw the HDL move. Give it that long before judging the metabolic impact. If you're on medication for blood sugar, blood pressure or cholesterol, please speak to your GP before adding significant resistance training. Not because it's dangerous, but because it may change your medication needs, and you want that monitored. Fasting changes medication interaction, resistance training changes body composition and insulin sensitivity. Your GP needs to know what you're doing so the dosing stays right. Red flags during lifting, dizziness that doesn't pass with rest, chest pain, severe headache, stop. See your GP. They're not symptoms to push through. If you have a history of joint problems, back injury or any other physical limitation, start with your body weight only and build slowly. The goal is consistency over decades, not performance next month. I've built a simple tracking template, steps, resistance sessions, waist measurements and monthly biomarker log, how to average your weight on a weekly basis. Everything you need to run the before and after comparison properly. Links in the description. It's free. And please, this is not educational content, it's not medical advice. Do speak to your GP before changing your fasting pattern, diets or medication, especially if you're on diabetes or blood pressure meds.